Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Skill Me Up expert talk today, talking about the operations evolution that you might see yourselves going through if you're in the middle of a digital transformation. I'm Shannon Kuehn, and I'm a senior cloud advocate on the enterprise platforms and tools team at Microsoft. One of my big charters is to reach out to the community and have a lot of conversations to help demystifying the process of cloud adoption. I also have spent a number of years in the architect role as well, so I've worked with very large enterprises, prepping them to adopt the cloud successfully. And then you can reach out to me on any of these platforms, Twitter, email, or LinkedIn. I'm happy to keep the dialogue going.
And I'm Dwayne Natwick. I am a cloud training architect lead here at Opsagility and Skill Me Up. I'm also an Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer regional lead for that program as well. And as with Shannon, you can find me on the social media links provided. I'm very active on social media, so feel free to reach out and ask any questions you might have. So what are we going to talk about today? If you've kept up with the other sessions that Shannon and I have done recently around cloud adoption framework and well architected framework and landing zones and Azure migration, we've been really taking you down a journey of bringing your company into and your organization into a cloud native type of organization. So today, really, we're going to take that a step further in how, as you continue that journey, how are you going through the evolution of your operations team and how you're running your operations for working in a Microsoft Azure cloud environment. So we're going to talk about some of the cloud, some of the challenges and objectives. We're going to go through and continue to kind of reinforce that cloud journey and how we're taking that journey. We're going to spend some time on Cloud Center of Excellence and how you can build that practice within your organization, and then we'll share some examples, implementation examples, and some resources that you can utilize to help you continue that evolution as well. So Shannon, why don't you talk about some of the challenges and objectives?
Sure, I wasn't sure if I was going to talk. No worries. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges and objectives, right? So I think when companies are taking a look at this, there's a desire to operate traditionally, right? So where you've got your silos, you've got your central IT, you've got your business units, you've got your middleware team, security, networking, et cetera. What happens is you kind of still want that control, but on the flip side, the cloud is changing ever so quickly. So what you lose is if you apply more control, you will lose some of that speed and agility. It's hard to have your cake and eat it too. There's no easy way to move forward. It requires a little bit of a mind shift. So the big part here is to understand the right way to build up a team, to build up a company, and to expand what you're doing. So, the challenge is you want to have that control, but you also want to have that speed and agility. And it's possible, but it does take a little bit of a mind shift. So why do you want to change, right? Well, we've got this traditional sort of idea here. There's dedicated infrastructure for each application. There's purpose-built hardware. There's a procurement process, right? There's distinct infrastructure and operations teams. There's customized processes and configurations. There's physical access, manual labor. There's a lot you've built in related to traditional IT. It's not one of those easier to replace things, at least initially, right? A lot of folks I've worked with think it's the right way to move forward, especially as you adopt cloud. So the idea here is everything lives on a server. When you think about a more modernized approach, we're moving to a service-based platform, right? So we're moving to a platform like Azure, like GCP, like AWS, right? You want to loosely couple your apps together, and you want to build out microservices. You start thinking about industry standard hardware. You start thinking about services like DevOps, configuration management, infrastructure as code. You standardize processes and configurations. Everything's software defined. So you've got capacity to build things out with repeatability, where maybe in the traditional world, you didn't necessarily have that reality, right? And when you think through this, automation's king, right? That's the big part of how to make this become an awesome transformation where you keep that agility and that speed, right? And the idea here is if you don't change, eventually your competitors could be changing and could then rewrite what your company's mantra is or what your company's charter is. That's where it becomes a little bit of an interesting reality. And if you click one more time, you'll see there's I think click one more time. So when you look at this, we think of traditional as being kind of older, right? Everything's very compartmentalized, right? You're not moving things forward. There's a specific step and a specific process you make to move things forward. Whereas when it comes to service bases, you just kind of just operate, right? You've got all of the right controls in place. You've got the right landing zones. You've got the right framework that you've been able to build that helps you move that agility forward. So rather than it being very single-threaded, right? I think of traditional IT as not always single-threaded, but it can be single-threaded, right? And I think of more modernized approaches as a lot more multi-threaded. So the paradigm shift here is, I think everybody's very familiar with coming to an intersection, right? You've got a stoplight, you've got specific ways to think through controlling what traffic flow looks like. So, somebody's not going to run a red light, at least in theory, right? Somebody's going to slow down if it turns yellow. Cars won't move until it turns green. It's a very ordered approach. The big piece here is that works fine and great, and it's definitely been able to help companies out up until now. But the problem becomes new services come out, I'd say every 6 to 8 weeks, something like that, or something changes enough that the approach of old is a hard approach to apply to the new. So, we want to enforce control, right, in that scenario. But the real reality here is to think through enabling of the kind of support. So the more modernized approach is to think about a roundabout. I don't know if there it is. So I don't know if you're like me. I'm not a huge fan of these, but I do understand why they exist. I always feel like they're in the most awkward spots, but there's never a problem moving traffic flow around, right? You come to an intersection, you make sure nobody's coming around the roundabout, and then you just go, right? It's self-service. You don't have to wait for a green light, a red light, or a yellow light to tell you what you can and cannot do. So this idea here is there's more freedom. There's a delegated responsibility, right? The central IT notion of the enforced control phase is moving more to having business units understand how to move things forward, right? They're the ones that are building out applications, they're building out environments, they're in a platform that maybe central IT has provisioned from like a landing zone perspective, but they have enough of a playground to play in to build, experiment, and then take all of the builds and experiments to kind of a minimum viable product, and then move that into production where they're really transforming the day-to-day. So when we think about, responding to business needs for growth and innovation, so, we need a little bit more engagement, right? Customers and employees experience ways in which where they have to start communicating more closely, right? So you have to break apart the silos. You have to break down the walls and have more conversations with people about the applications that they're building, supporting, what the mission criticality is like, what the SLAs should be maintained if it moves into the cloud. And if you think about it, that helps speed and agility because then you can build environments and bring things online a lot faster because you've got the increased skill and increased awareness of what your folks now understand how to build certain things. When we think about kind of control here too, so Now that we all live in this world of BYOD, bring your own device, there's a lot more devices that people are bringing to connect into environments. So you have to plan for that, and you have to be able to innovate, because somebody might be traveling, but they may have a personal laptop on them and they may have something blow up, right? That's the nature of IT, especially IT, right? So you want to make sure that they could potentially get in, but you have to think about the fact that there's probably going to be multiple types of devices connecting into your environment. And then from there too, there's a lot more data, especially as you go to the cloud. There's a lot more data analytics, data being generated, data being ingested, data being generated, right? So you have to think about taking all that data and building out the right ways to look at the data to make informed decisions. Because if you're seeing that a specific workload is under spec'd, maybe end users are complaining, maybe the middleware teams are complaining, you can now start tracking all of that over time. And that's what helps when you think through the digital transformation. You're getting to the point where you're able to make the right decisions to move things forward and to be less of a bottleneck, so to speak. Now, is this still, I think you're going to go on this one, right?
Yep. So let's talk about the cloud journey now, and what we need to do to begin that transformation and that move from what we were talking about in terms of the traditional to the more modern approach. So some of the things to think about, as we are thinking about that more modernized, that approach that's less linear and more multi-scale, with the minimum viable product, and how we're going about this. It's good to think about, as you move and compare, how you're going into that modernized approach, which is generally considered a DevOps approach, where we're taking it and we're developing, we're doing that continuous integration, continuous development of our applications, of our workloads, and we're providing a level of performance with those, and to maintain its availability, maintain its viability, as well as increase that speed and agility. And this slide kind of shows some information here in terms of how DevOps companies that operationalize this type of approach have 46 times more frequent code deployments. They are the lead time to commit and deploy is off the charts in terms of 2,500 times faster than in a traditional approach, linear type of approach. The change failure rate is also 7 times lower. So you're doing a lot more testing and continuous testing of your applications. So therefore, once it does go live and once it is fully deployed into production, it has much less likelihood to fail, because you're constantly in a process and a workflow of pre-testing and staging before you actually deploy into production. And then the time to recover in this operational approach is, again, another 2,600 times faster to recover from potential incidents, because again, your operational approach and your culture now is to continuously evaluate and continuously test and continuously evolve those within your operations, to make sure that that what goes into production is a solid application workload that is less likely to fail. But also, because you have that process of continuous development and continuous integration, when you have an incident, you can be much more nimble and agile to fix those incidents quickly. So as you're looking down the path and making that journey, so now we just talked about what the benefit is and what what you potentially could see as an organization taking this operational approach. But how are you going to get there? Where are you going? How are you going to find your way to becoming that modern DevOps type organization and transforming your organization? And it's really a 5-step approach in terms of this slide, where you need to identify where those quick wins are, and you need to look at your team and how you're going to transform them and transform your operations and your teams into this approach. So what kind of what quick wins can you have in terms of identifying applications that are easily moved into a cloud native? And we discussed this a little bit when we were talking about Azure Migrate, as well as landing zones, in terms of finding those easy wins and those applications that we could put into that agile type approach and that DevOps type approach, utilizing the automation and taking advantage of automation tools within the organization, within Azure, utilizing ARM templates for deployment of workloads and building applications on platform services can help to progress the performance of your applications from low performers to better performers and better minimum viable products. Again, as we build more automation in as well, and start utilizing that automation and utilizing those platforms within the Azure environment, we now have the ability to increase our test requirements, and rather than having our testing be a manual process, we are now lowering our technical debt, to avoid those blockers that block progress. And as we're going through this, it's important to think about that technical debt and what we're doing in terms of our teams and our organization as well, to help them evolve and help them down the path of training and learning additional skill sets, because one of the key blockers might be this technical debt and the ability to get past the traditional. I've worked with multiple CSPs in the past, where trying to get them from a traditional hosting type environment where it's server this, server that, and into taking them to a more cloud native direction is, if you've been in this area of operations for 20 years, getting that mindset and that approach to evolving and learning more and changing how your operations is done is a very difficult approach. So technical debt does really get in your way, really starts to get in your way until you really embrace it. And that's one of the key things. And going back to the start, in finding those quick wins and getting your team motivated is really an important approach and an important way to, from an organizational standpoint, to even head down this journey. If you don't have buy-in from the top down within your organization to that we're going to evolve and we're going to change, then it might slow down that journey. And you may need to utilize partners and utilize outside sources to help to fill those gaps of that technical debt, and help with some of the complexity that goes into the DevOps organization. And then finally, in terms of the journey is then that relentless improvement. And like I was saying in the previous slide, as you become that DevOps organization and that modernized organization, you are now looking at high performance and building applications that are going to be more resilient. They're going to be much much more. There's going to be a lot more flexibility and ability to react to potential issues in your code and how it's going to be utilized within an organization, as well as utilizing platforms within cloud native applications and within Azure. You can also then scale and expand the capabilities of those applications much easier. And this takes it to a different level here in terms of how we're phasing that approach in that cloud journey. So previous slide, we were talking more about from a team aspect and how we're going to adjust the culture of the organization. And this takes it a different step in terms of kind of looking at it in terms of a maturity model approach and how we're looking at it. And again, that phase one goes right along with that quick win kind of approach and determining, okay, how are we going, we're going to need to experiment a little bit in Azure. Let's find, an application that's going to be one of those quick wins and try that within Azure. Maybe you're running it in parallel with your current environment just to find out and get data and gather data on how it's going to help and scale better or perform better within that Azure environment. And at that point, now we're starting to build that technical foundation. We're building, like I was saying before, you're learning more. Your organization and your operations is understanding the Azure environment. You're finding the areas and the services within Azure to take advantage of, to utilize. You're finding that proof of value. Again, you're launching those first workloads. You're finding those landing zones within your organization. You're migrating those. You're utilizing that environment. You're enabling different playgrounds and sandboxes that you can continue to learn and continue to decrease that technical debt as well within your organization as your teams start getting more comfortable. And then as we start moving into phase three, now we're starting to think from the aspect of a cloud center of excellence. Now what are we doing in terms of our development and our DevOps organization for continuous integration, continuous development? How are we scaling up additional workloads, developing and reusing services? Now we're starting to really become that and deliver our applications on that cloud native platform. We're creating our own organization in the cloud. So we've taken, our traditional operations teams, our service delivery teams, and we have now built our own cloud organization as that center of excellence as well, where we're not just doing traditional, but now we've got a whole team that's running those workloads. They're managing those workloads. They're developing on those workloads, and it's a little bit different than a typical organization might be, where they've got very siloed developers and they've got siloed service delivery and siloed engineers. That cloud center of excellence, which Shannon will talk about in a minute, really becomes a complete organization of a team that's working together to fill all of those roles and fill all of those aspects. And then once you move from there into phase four, now you're really clicking along and you're finding better ways to get to market faster with your applications. You're enabling more business innovation. Maybe you're enabling more analytics approaches to your applications, and what were cognitive services and AI chat bots, and how we're servicing our customers. You're really starting to add additional self-service functions and functionality to deliver a better product to your customer. And as I stated before, Shannon, why don't you talk about that, expand upon that cloud center of excellence once we've gotten into that phase 4 and phase 5.
Sure. So you might see it branded as CCoE. A lot of times I've worked with customers who are like, what's CCoE? Well, that stands for Cloud Center of Excellence, right? And it's just an idea here. It's not necessarily like you check a box and you have one. No, it's really following suit to changing that mind shift, right? So this Cloud Center of Excellence, it will help build a modern IT organization that follows an agile approach to capture business requirements. So you've got, reusable deployment packages, you've got repeatable deployment scripts, templates, you've got automation in place here. All of this aligns with the security posture for your company. You've got compliance and you've got service management policies as well. So this really does take into consideration ways in which to move this faster and move forward. You've got, so it also maintains a functional Azure platform in alignment with operational procedures. The way I've seen this done, it's usually a handful of folks, right? So it's very much so a cross-pollinated type group. It's not just infrastructure, it's not just security, it's not just networking. It's somebody from each one of those groups, and they come together and they're the Cloud Center of Excellence. Because if you think about cloud, everything changes, right? And it doesn't change to the point that you don't know how to operate on a day-to-day basis. But because we're dealing with a software-defined world and we're no longer buying hardware, we're no longer procuring hardware, dealing with maintenance contracts, you have to think about ways in which to continue to innovate. And so you need those different folks coming into this Cloud Center of Excellence to build up a repository so that when other parts of the business come into the mix and they want to move forward, they have capacity to take what's already been done and apply it. So when you think about it, it's going from kind of this IT infra to broker of digital innovation, right? So you want to make sure that you've got folks paying attention to trends, that they understand the new services, the new features, how to build, deploy. Experimentation is going to be huge with this group. You have to figure out how to use the brand new tools as they come out. And then this helps enable that digital transformation. It helps you think through how budgets will work. You can think about business outcomes, that return on investments a little easier to track, especially with all of the data that you wind up getting and the telemetry information that gets captured inside of each of the services, right? So there's a lot of interesting things that you can see related to taking it from kind of that traditional mindset where maybe you don't quite know what the business units are doing once you give them 5 servers, to now you can see exactly what they're doing because everything's reporting in an interesting way. And you can kind of figure out where the gaps were prior to moving to the cloud. So it's kind of an interesting evolution to think through building out that Cloud Center of Excellence. They're the ones that are kind of playing point, so to speak. So I like this visual a lot here because if you think about traditional enterprise, you've got your developers and your functional application owners or your middleware teams, right? They're the ones that need things, right? They need servers. They need more networking. They need maybe a site-to-site VPN. They need some sort of BGP routes enabled for access to a third-party solution that requires network connectivity. There's a lot of needs that they want. Well, they'll come to central IT, and central IT will figure out when they can build it, how fast they can build it, et cetera. Usually it's a ticket, right? Goes in and then I don't know what happens. Sometimes it doesn't really quite come to light fast enough. Then you get annoyed folks on the development side and middleware teams. But, IT becomes this kind of bottleneck, so to speak, in the traditional mindset, right? They're the ones that are coming up with the strategy, design, transition, and operation, and maybe they're not the right ones to be suited to have that full-blown control, because then it turns into a little bit of the stalled out reality. And then, you can also think about leaning on kind of, hosting that environment too, because sometimes customers do choose to go that route. Maybe they're smaller. But when you think about more of the modern enterprise, where I think everybody wants to go, you see biz DevOps. I'm not a huge fan of that term, but I think you can understand what it's doing, right? You're taking your business folks, you're merging them with your devs, and you're merging them with your ops folks. That's the only way that you break down the silos and you start moving things forward a lot faster. Because you need somebody to translate the business reality. You need a dev to understand how to build it, potentially, if they're the ones building it. And you need an infrastructure person or an ops person to understand how to monitor it, how to make sure the networking requirements are there, the uptime, the compute is factored in. And so what happens there is, you've got IT maybe as a partner, right? So IT becomes that Cloud Center of Excellence, and they're the ones that usually have different folks sitting through different sitting within different, from different silos, and they're the ones that kind of come in and help broker the connections. So they figure out, what needs to happen when they've been presented with the idea here from the biz DevOps teams, right? And they're the ones that can kind of plug in the right ways of approaching the solution with the migration pattern into Azure or building it out as a greenfield application. There's a lot of different uniqueness sides of things here if you allow those business units or those different sides of the business to kind of come together and really highlight exactly what they need. So the Cloud Center of Excellence, it leads to customer self-reliance. I think everybody, this is a little scary. I'll definitely say this scared me a little bit when I started thinking about this. But once I had worked with so many customers who wanted central IT to get out of the mix, it made more sense, right? Central IT should just really be there to provide the environment, right? There should be enough controls in place. The teams should agree upon the right ways to provision IAM, which is identity and access management, all the right RBAC controls or role-based access controls, all of the policies, all of the potential locks or restrictions, things you can and cannot do. That should all be thought about by maybe that CCoE team, right? I've worked with customers who don't really quite have a CCoE team, and so they just kind of come up with it on their own. But that Cloud Center of Excellence team really should drive what that kind of playground, so to speak, looks like. So customers then, which is, your business units potentially, or your middleware teams, they're equipped to fully manage, implement, and run operations to, kind of gain a faster reality here to move things forward. So, you've got improved agility where you are using kind of predefined, automated, and certified configurations. They're following a security baseline, an identity and access baseline. They're following a network baseline, right? They're within the parameters of what you would actually allow. From there, the business innovation becomes a big part of the next kind of hurdles or the next phases, so to speak. The release frequency of new functionality based on cloud native modern IT. So you've got, the ability to release production deployments faster. You can build up all of the skills in the lower level environments so that when production rolls out, it's hopefully resilient. And then if it's not resilient, you've got ways in which to self-heal or correct, because your Cloud Center of Excellence team will have been working on ways to sort of self-heal, or in the event something, a node goes down or something is corrupt, they can spawn new containers or something of that sort, right? You've got ways of using new capabilities that will enhance organizational responsiveness, and it promotes the innovation. The customer has cloud native and DevOps capabilities built in, because the Cloud Center of Excellence really defines what that will look like. And this helps support the rhythm of business, and it helps promote innovation. So, once you've got the right people identified, and once they all kind of come together in a cohesive fashion, you're going to start to see things move faster in that digital transformation aspect. So the control factors are still at play here. So you still have your control. It's just a little bit different, right? So you will have already decided what that security baseline looks like, what that identity baseline looks like, what the networking is going to look like, if you're going to extend your Active Directory infrastructure in Azure, et cetera, right? So you've got all of this pre-planned so that your controls are in place here. And, you've got ways to make sure that the control is managed, where you don't have to worry about, oh gosh, is somebody going to go spin up an M series VM and it's going to cost me a lot of money? No, you can actually restrict that, right? So there's levels of control here that the Cloud Center of Excellence team can build out and help with that digital transformation, which moves things forward and doesn't stall it out. So, the CCoE team will operate as a CCoE team. They'll kind of take over CCoE operations. It won't be IT operations, but they'll be the ones that'll go out, identify the new services, identify the new enhancements, figure out ways in which to train up folks, because that's also hard. Skilling's it's a real tough conversation with some customers because there's not enough time, right? There's a lot of fires that potentially happen in a production environment, but you also have to take your skill set on premises in the traditional IT sense and innovate and move it into Azure or a cloud-based solution, right? So that's not an easy reality. And your Cloud Center of Excellence is going to be that one that helps build out what that will look like on a day-to-day basis. This then leads itself well into kind of leaning on that agile or modern IT sort of reality, where the model is a lot leaner. You don't have to have 50 people in a room to make a decision. You've got 5 people, 10 people that you nominated from all different parts of IT to kind of come in and really understand the business. And then you've got a way to move forward a little faster as a result. From there, design and implement workloads in Azure. So customers, they've got retained capabilities to deploy, design, and operate new workloads using that approach, right? So I'm a business unit person at a company, right? And I want to be able to go and spin up a bunch of resources for a brand new web app that I want to have external folks come in and access. I should have the right levels of control once you've kind of gone into this phased approach here. I should have ways in which to go build this out and not have to go submit a ticket, right? I have specific roles in my company. I should be able to go spin up what I need to in order to either prove the value or extend value, or there's a plethora of different things you could think about. So there are so in terms of like implementation and kind of resources. So the CCoE vision and strategy. So the idea here is to kill the middleman, right? Middleman used to be central IT, right? And that's, I use that. I don't think central IT should just go away. There's still a reason to have central IT around, but central IT shouldn't be the bottleneck here. So the idea here is to figure out the needs, figure out ways to document, have the right platform, and have the right controls to go build on the platform. So, what if there's no central IT organization and business units, would just use cloud services without this central IT organization? I think that's a reality that's a lot more appealing to folks who need to go spin things up, right? Because they just need to go test something out, right? Maybe they're in the experimentation phase of, can this actually be a viable solution if we move into Azure? So, that's kind of the vision drivers that's like the start of it, I should say. And then the vision itself is to really shift the value of the central IT department from build, own, and run to enable others to autonomously build. So central IT could also be that CCoE. I've worked with customers who start to nominate folks in central IT to really be that, I guess, person or series of people that comes in and has those conversations with different business units. So they know how to use Azure. So they know how to go build a VM. They know how to go build a load balancer. They know how to make sure that they're picking the right SKUs. So that everything builds correctly, right? They're adding the right tagging. So from there, the strategy, is to drive the desire to change using like a compelling event, cloud native principles, tools, controls, and way of working in a controlled public cloud environment to shift the value of the traditional IT department from build, own, and run towards enable others to do things autonomously. If you start to move the burden of responsibility away from central IT, they're probably going to love you a lot more, because they're going to have people who are more skilled in these different parts of the business to be able to bring back a server from a backup, right? To be able to redeploy something on the fly because they've got a series of templates that they can just go grab from. The idea here is to have central IT become the enabler versus kind of the bottleneck. And that's just the nature of how things have gone, right? Central IT, like I mentioned earlier, they still have a place here, and maybe they are the team that becomes the CCoE team to help build out what that looks like. So from there, the outcome, you've got a fully autonomous set of BizSecOps DevOps teams, and then they can continuously deliver value to end users in a secure, consistent, and predictable way, right? So they can plan, develop, build, test, release, deploy, and operate workloads in a secure and consistent way, which is a great reality in the sense that they don't have to have somebody hand-holding that deployment. They can go build it on their own. And then you can get reporting on what they built. So if they built it wrong, or if somehow a policy didn't get flagged in time, you've got ways in which to track and make sure that they're compliant or they're building it correctly. I worked with a customer who chose to take central IT out of the mix, but then made central IT on the hook for all the documentation, the levels of training, right? The repository of templates, the repository of info on how to think about what these actual resources are and how they bring value to the firm. So, really enabling those business units to move things forward is going to help that digital transformation continue to gain speed. So the team model itself, it's one of those things where maybe you've got a solution architecture team. Maybe you've got a product team and a platform team, right? They can be stretched between multiple workloads. There's no right or wrong way to approach this. You need to have that playground, right? Or that experimentation opportunity so that your folks can build up the right skills. But the idea here is that the Cloud Center of Excellence sort of oversees this. They are laying over all of the different layers here. So they're, making sure that they understand the architecture, making sure that they understand the native products, the cloud native products they're going to be using, the platform components, the management and security. But you have to think about these teams as kind of coming together and giving some business requirements so the Cloud Center of Excellence team can go document it correctly. So what tends to happen here is the Cloud Center of Excellence team really sort of unifies things. I used to make this terrible joke that they were more like the therapists, right? They helped these business units figure out how to work better together. And so, and then from there, they also enable those different business units to work together as well, or different parts of an application, because maybe your networking person never understood why your middleware team needed such a meaty database, right? And it's just a matter of having a conversation, but sometimes that never happened in the traditional IT realm. So the Cloud Center of Excellence paradigm here is, it's born in the cloud organizational structure, the service broker approach, right? It's loosely coupled in the born in the cloud architecture, right? So you're reusing certified cloud services, you're reusing templates, you're building out repeatable deployments so that you understand what's happening from a predictability perspective. You've got born in the cloud tooling, so you can use those, right? You don't need to think about other tooling. You can think about living in a hybrid world for a while. There are tools that allow you to automate things on premises as well as in Azure or a different cloud, right? But you can always just make it be a point that anything that happens in the cloud needs to be using the cloud native tooling, right? You've got born in the cloud controls. Those are also important. Those are like the policies, the resource locks, the RBAC controls, maybe the managed identity. You don't want to have somebody go into a server. You want to have a managed identity be deployed or a service principal. So, you may want to get to that point where you have zero touch as well. I've worked with customers who don't want to have people get onto production machines. So they have to think about using DevOps pipelines, managed identities, et cetera, to make things continue to move forward. So patching machines, making sure that the IIS site is up and functional, et cetera, right? There's a lot of different ways to think about taking that zero touch idea here and adding some infrastructure as code automation so that you've got the deployment mechanisms handled. You don't have to think about RDPing into a server or SSHing into a server and configuring something. It's already configured, right? And you also make sure you've got configuration management so that there's no configuration drift as the servers continue to live, right? And then when you think about born in the cloud process implementation, so this is just the cloud native operating model. This is maybe a governance plan. This is governance in general. You want to make sure you've got the right strategy, the right SLAs, the right controls in place. This is really key. And I've worked with customers who kind of stall out. I joke that this is the analysis by paralysis phase, and there's ways in which to move forward. A lot of times maybe 80% of it matches up to what you would hope in terms of a cloud platform. Well, let's try working with that 80% and let's try building up and flexing that muscle, because things do change enough where you have to think about, how to kind of move that one forward. So the roads to Azure or any cloud, you can extend the current IT, right? That's usually version 1.0, where you've got the security controls, ITIL processes, existing policies and procedures, existing networking, identity architectures, et cetera. Usually once you get into Azure and once you extend your DC into Azure, then you start thinking about how to optimize and maybe decouple some of these server-based workloads. Maybe you're leaning on cloud native security controls, you're leaning on modern service management, you're changing to a DevOps mindset, and you're leaning on cloud native tooling. Think of it like a phased approach, right? So you start and you only have 80% of it where you would like it to be. Well, let's start with the 80%. Let's figure out if we can get the last 20% solutioned for. And if we can't, then we just figure out the right workloads to move with that 80%, because there's probably workloads that would fit the bill on that front. Oh, I think, Dwayne, you were going to talk about that.
That's all right. You were rolling. I let you go.
So I will transition it back over to Dwayne here if you're interested. Otherwise, I can kind of keep going. It's up to you.
No, I'm good here. I'm good here. Yeah, let's talk
Okay.
about speed and stability. So yeah, as we've continued down that journey, now we're moving and we've evolved into that DevOps type organization. We have that center. We have our cloud center of excellence. We have decreased our technical debt, and we've now brought together our traditional IT silos and developer silos, and created that, and security groups, and brought them all together in terms of one team. So now what we've done is we've created now an enablement to be an agile organization and utilize DevOps, and can now utilize that and incentivize on that behavior, on that continuous development, provide more insights within our organization on what we're able to do rather than just controlling everything, and then balance that standardization along with flexibility. So as we're building in more automation and we're building in that center of excellence where we're continuously taking that agile approach to development and to maintaining our applications, now we've built our standardization in terms of landing zones and tagging and jurisdiction in terms of and security and all of those pieces of the puzzle within our build into standards that we can now automate those deployments and build that flexibility and continue to mature that over time, and mature that flexibility and expand that flexibility as we go in there, but also stay in control. So we're going all the way back to to like the first slide of this presentation here, with that delicate balancing act of having that agility, but also staying in control, where we have through many of the cloud native tools an ability for that end-to-end traceability. We're built in that cloud center of excellence and utilizing the CI/CD tools of DevOps to for testing and for deployment. We're able to audit and have traceability for that control, the governance of the organization, and what we're doing now for and how we're governing where our applications are running or where our data is held, and then as well as then the identity and data centric tools, again where the data sovereignty is, making sure that our applications that are running in certain countries and areas that have specific data regulations and GDPR regulations, for example, that information is staying there, and we can run our applications in multiple regions without compromising the performance, and maybe even increasing the performance of those applications. And then as well as identity, maintaining our identity, maintaining a level of our zero trust model of making sure that there's a constant verification of people, verifying the role, verifying who they are and their roles, in terms of role-based access controls and what they have access to and what they're able to access and utilize and make adjustments to and view and change, and all of those areas are still in that realm of control and the ability to control those and to maintain that level of governance within our organization. And so, when is a cloud center of excellence successful? And we've talked around many of these aspects already. But if you're moving and building that cloud center of excellence, and you're building that you're evolving from an operational standpoint, when can you kind of put a stamp in it and say, hey, I've successfully moved, moved my operations into a cloud native operations. I have my cloud center of excellence, and we are a successful organization. You know, that all, comes into these particular boxes where, the product ownership is within your organization. It's not anymore within the traditional IT realm. The entire organization owns that product now, not just IT. So you've kind of, gone into that biz DevOps approach that Shannon was talking about. Executive sponsorship and project management is all autonomous within your organization now. The executives within the organization understand what we want to deliver, and instead of delivering, an infrastructure, now we're delivering our workloads, we're delivering our operations. So it's a much more business centric approach and thinking to how you're focusing your time and your effort rather than focusing on infrastructure. So that helps that evolution even further, and that takes it to that cloud native approach as well. We're leveraging platforms within Azure and those cloud native services rather than having to build infrastructure and take that traditional sectional type IT approach. We're now building on the application standpoint. So your cloud center of excellence and your development and your organization around infrastructure and security is a strong business focus now. It's what we're delivering in terms of our workload and our application and what we're delivering to our customers. And there's much more of a feeling and thought behind that than I need to build a infrastructure for this application. We have now, we've decreased our technical debt, and we have the right skill levels of all of our resources. Our resources have all skilled up. They've crossed skill, they've gone and cross-pollinated in terms of their skill sets and developed new skill sets and evolved themselves from a professional standpoint to have the proper skill levels versus just being infrastructure people or just being security people. They are now they now understand the roles and responsibilities across the entire center of excellence. There's transparency on backlogs and different blockers and impediments within the agile process. It's in a constant review state. We're constantly looking and communicating to kind of bring that together with the internal communication to DevOps teams. All that communication is now taking place. There's dashboards and project boards in terms of what's happening within the organization. You can pull all this into dashboards to present to the business end of the organization so that they have and can continue that ownership of the product within the organization and understand where those backlogs are and where different blockers and impediments might be holding back different releases into production, or where there might be problems or incidents with an application. We're now utilizing the proper facilities and doing more collaboration across teams. The teams are now closer to each other, as we've talked about many times. They're no longer in a siloed approach. We now have our cloud center of excellence that is that therapy group that's bringing everybody together and working, getting everybody to have a cohesive process to how we're going to market and how we're building our workloads and what we're presenting to our customers. And Shannon, I think you had some specific examples you wanted to talk about on this particular slide. So.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it here in the sense that if you think about getting an application into production faster, you want to lean on things like a CI/CD pipeline. Maybe you want to bring about HPC clusters inside of Azure that might help build out what you need to run in terms of testing. You can continuously validate the security platform within the organization as well. You can provide new innovative ways to interact with end customers by using maybe a chatbot or something like that. There's a lot of nifty ways to think about transforming your day-to-day operations. I worked with a customer prior to Microsoft who really kind of split apart central IT and aligned the central IT folks with business units. And it was an interesting reality. Of course, they ran into hurdles. It's not a very normal, and I guess if you think about normal being traditional IT, it's not normal at first. So there's a little bit of a trepidation, so to speak. Nobody really wanted to make this change. But what happened was they were able to start building out things much faster because they had people who understood networking and infrastructure, so compute storage, right? They had somebody who understood security as well, sitting with business units. So they could actually come up with the right way to build out platforms or build out solutions that would give them all of the right data that they would need to figure out the right way or the right times to do certain activities of the year. So, they were an oil and gas company, and so they had to figure out the right times to drill in certain parts of the world, right? Because it's very much so dictated by what's happening outside, right? You don't drill all months of the year. So it was an interesting reality for them to take apart that central IT and have them sit with business units. And what they actually achieved was a much faster transformation. And so I think ultimately it was a great thing, but they also had a little bit of hurdles they had to go through to get them where they needed to be. The next two slides, we'll hit on them real quick here. They're mostly just strong visuals here to hit home the idea that, before, if you wanted a brand new subscription, right, especially even as folks take that central IT mentality into Azure, you might have to think about putting a ticket in, right? And then you've got the central IT intake team. It's a manual activity. You could probably automate that, but folks don't really think about that until they kind of go through this whole process. They're like, gosh, that doesn't take any less time than it did if we were on premises. And then they've got the partially automated end result, meaning they can go spin up a subscription when somebody runs a script, right? Or somebody runs an ARM template, or, there could be a myriad of different things that wind up happening as a result of saying, I want a subscription, because you could also think about having all of those landing zones as well. Well, it took a lot longer, right? So it took time. There's inconsistent deployments. When you think about really revolutionizing what you're doing with this Cloud Center of Excellence, you can initiate the release. You can have that release go into a release pipeline. You could put gates in. People could actually approve this, meaning it can't just go out into the wild without a approval somewhere. And then you've got a self-managed subscription. I think a lot of folks are a little scared about this, and that's not an uncommon sentiment. But the reality is, if you can give them what they need faster, they're going to be much happier. They're going to be able to continue to do what they need to do to bring about the right levels of return on investment so that they can show their business value. And if, the more you stall in the central IT perspective, the more that other competitors start to gain momentum, because even if you're not doing this, other companies are. And so it's an opportunity for you to kind of flip the switch, so to speak, and approach it from a different perspective. The next slide is, let's see, it's traditional versus CCoE. So the traditional here is, workload A sits in an app team. The central IT organization has to kind of provision it. Workload B, same sort of scenario. It's not really an automated sort of thing. Parts of it could be, but it's still very siloed. And the idea here is to flip from that traditional mindset into a Cloud Center of Excellence where you have that customer repository. You've got all of the documentation on how to build a managed identity. You've got, all documentation on how to provision resources, how to spin up a Kubernetes cluster, how to think about networking inside of a Kubernetes cluster. You've got all of the ways in which to build out templated environments so that you're not having to go into the portal and click through and have it be a very manual process. Because what winds up happening is, the deployment is a matter of potentially minutes, hours, versus months, maybe weeks. So, the idea here is to have that repository. That repository is constantly iterated on. It's not final. It's never final because the cloud's never final. So, but it's the idea here too that, you can have more of that self-servicing reality that folks are going to that repository directly. And then if you think about, cloud native governance, we've hit on this too, right? The idea that you've got management groups, you've got cost management, policies, blueprints. This is all part of your cloud adoption framework, right? You can apply this and put it in that kind of central repository so that your developers and your operations folks can go build what they need to build. You've got that cloud custodian team or the Cloud Center of Excellence, but these folks can now go operate without having to go talk to that team, right? They've got this area where they can go grab stuff, and sure, they can be sought out for questions. I don't quite get this piece of documentation. Can we schedule some time, right? I think that adds itself into the mix here, but the idea here is to be as self-servicing as much as possible here. And the cloud native governance controls of Azure allow for that by way of placing management groups in the mix, thinking about cost management, setting up alerts, budgetary alerts in the event somebody's going over, taking a look at how the spend tracks month over month. And then there's, policies themselves. So I don't want you to spin up a specific VM. I don't want you to touch networking. I'm going to lock this down. I don't want you to go deploy in a different region, et cetera, right? And then blueprints is another way to kind of make sure that folks operate within the controls that you've defined as part of that Cloud Center of Excellence team, so that you've got the environments looking very repeatable. They're not a weird random. You don't have like Testo 1, Testo 2 sitting out there in production. So in terms of getting started, identify, a business initiative or, workloads that could benefit from a DevOps approach in terms of transformation. You've got to identify the stakeholders to assure kind of sponsorship and commitment for Azure and cloud native approaches, right? So you want to make sure that you are very conscious with who you pick and how you talk to them, because initially you have to break down those silos. And then the idea here is to involve that Cloud Center of Excellence team early on for purchasing to avoid kind of classic supplier customer dynamics, because transformation means partnering. So having that agile or that Scrum, kind of model, that helps this process move forward much faster. And then finally, these are our, public resources that, Microsoft shares with a lot of customers. I wanted to incorporate this to our talk today so that when you're looking at this either on demand or you're reading this PowerPoint, you've got a series of links that'll be helpful in terms of transforming what you're doing with your company.
Great. So thanks everybody for attending today's talk. We covered quite a bit of information in the hour around the challenges and objectives, the journey to evolving your operations into that cloud center of excellence, and how and what resources are available then to kind of go back and look at to determine how you're going to take that approach as well. So welcome you to, again, reach out to Shannon or I on social media if you have any questions. This is a kind of a real high level conceptual topic that we wanted to share as we've gone through that cloud adoption, and we've built on all of those areas of cloud adoption, having what you're going to do from an operational standpoint as well as an infrastructure standpoint is very important as you're making that cloud journey, and we've hopefully covered that well for you today. So we appreciate you attending our cloud native expert talk today on the operations evolution for the cloud. My name's Dwayne Natwick.
I'm Shannon Kuehn.
And we want to thank you very much for attending. And again, if you've missed any of our talks, I think this is our 5th of 6 that we've been working through here around that whole cloud evolution. You can find these on the Skill Me Up YouTube channel as well as on skillmeup.com, and find any of the upcoming live events that we have on skillmeup.com as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.